he showed 300s, breaking all those records and setting a good platform going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to depict such a perfect day in many ways, but certainly very chuffed, in the position that I sit, and certainly reminded that it's certainly not about me, but about, as you mentioned there, the grit and determination that the guys showed. Something that we often reflect upon is, what are the conditions? What are our best options according to the conditions? And I think that was pretty much a perfect day, breaking records, opportunities to score 300s, doesn't come around every day. So we'll certainly take that as a massive, massive confidence booster going into the rest of the tournament.
Thanks, Morgan. Stu, then Tianis.
Thanks, Lucy. Hi, JP. So then to follow on that, pretty close to perfect as you say, but you guys do a deep dive into these things afterwards. What would you have told the batters, if any, as far as improvements might be concerned?
So often the sort of review and reflection is depicting certain moments in the game, and that's generally on an individual basis. So something also that we like to reflect on is the impact of partnerships. So one being individual, second being partnerships, but merely talking about options against whatever phase of the game that we find ourselves against the opposition. So that's really the reflection. And to be honest, there's not going to be a lot there. I thought our mindsets and our intent was spot on. For the most part, I think the options were really good. And yes, we'll have conversations here and there that we could do something different or add something to a particular partnership. But outside of that, there's not much to reflect on other than you want to really affirm the things that we did well. I guess the thing that we have to acknowledge, in a tournament such as this, is that we're going to be faced with different conditions pretty much every game. So as much as we take learnings, it's, leading into a game, what are some of the things that we feel that we need to focus on in terms of our clear understanding of options that we need to take. So that's certainly been our reflection, and the feedback has been really positive.
Thanks, Stu. Tianis?
Hi, JP.
Hey,
I know
Tianis.
it's not your ball, it's not your division, but have you guys also done a reflection on the bowling, conceding more than 300s? I know all the guys who've spoken since said it was just such good batting conditions that they're not too worried. But are there some things that you want to change for the Aussie game?
So I think that the positive out of, particularly that bowling performance is there was really clear game plans and tactics, all right? So often the reflection is going to be what was the execution of that. And I think if we consistently operating and asking questions around the execution, that is where that is the space that we want to live in. And I think for the most part we have. So yes, there's been a good reflection around that, and particularly around conversations with Eric. But what I appreciate is that we're focusing a lot on execution. We're finally in a space, I believe, where the thinking is in the right direction and the tactics are really good. And that bodes us well going forward, because when we're operating in that space, that comes down to a preparation, a skill execution, which is, as a cricketer, if you're operating in that space predominantly, I think we're heading in the right direction.
Thanks, Tianis. Talford, then Zahir.
Thanks, Lucy. How's it, JP?
How's it been?
Hi. You played the Australians not just the other day, but these are very different conditions, and they're a stronger team, I think it's fair to say, than the team you faced in South Africa. So how does that change your approach going into this game?
It certainly wouldn't change our approach. I think we'd like to pride ourselves on preparation and process. So yes, there's confidence coming out of a series that we were 2-0 down and winning 3-2. And for the most part, a lot of those players were part of that series. But yes, there are certain threats that are going to be posed. One against these conditions, and obviously one or two players that didn't play in that series. So we'll certainly look at that. But ultimately, it's about a process, right? So if our preparation is around certain processes, we're not going to deter from that, and that sort of hones in on what are we going to be focusing on. So from that perspective, I can't see a lot changing other than just kind of focusing on that process for us. Yeah.
Thanks, Talford. So here.
Hi, James. James, there was a list of scores that came up after the game in Delhi, right? South Africa 400, the highest 400s. And two of them were in 2015. But in between those games, South Africa, the batting unit failed the very next game, 200, 200. How do you maintain that intensity, that it doesn't go into a tip and then a high and a tip and a high in the tournament as long as this, particularly facing Australia in the next one?
Well, firstly, let me say thank you for acknowledging the negatives, Zaire. Yeah, I can trust you to do that, so thank you. I think first and foremost, we have to acknowledge that this is a different batting group, and there's been a trend and a pattern with this group of real consistency. So to be honest, as a batting coach, I sit here not worried about the potential of a dip after a high. I think there's a real hunger and a determination within this group to really lead, particularly around the batting group. And it doesn't deter a lot from what I said earlier, in the previous question, was around process. And, it's certainly been drilled into these guys around really focusing on world-class preparation and process. And if we focus on that, we give ourselves the best chance, right? I said earlier as well about if we have a good understanding and assessment of conditions, we understand our options, and similarly to bowlers, if we're operating within that execution space, if that is our consistent review, then I believe we are operating in a high performance space, a world-class space. And whatever the result comes of that has to be. So I'm pretty chuffed with having not to deal with those kind of things, because I don't think there's any player in that top 6 that doesn't have that hunger and desire, irrespective of what their particular personal milestones were or as a team.
Thanks, Sahir. Hines?
Hi, JP. Hope you're well. JP, obviously, a very meaningful achievement for that trio in Delhi. It was their maiden World Cup centuries and stuff. But it was noticeable how emotional all three of them were. But probably not just because of the achievement, but because of the respective journeys of some of them. Like a Quiddy finally after 3 tournaments, getting there actually. And it's his last ODI assignment. Rassi, who had to perhaps, dispel a little bit of doubts and stuff. Just how chuffed were you for them actually reaching those achievements? Not just in terms of reaching a milestone in World Cups, but also just I almost want to say proving some of the doubters wrong, or even signing off on a good note, for example.
Yeah, it's an interesting point made, and having played with pretty much all of the guys you mentioned, I know for a fact that whatever their driver is, there's a strong determination to put up that performance to give the team the best opportunity. And yes, there will be personal things that they'd like to achieve, but certainly the driver for us is putting the team first and what does the team need. And, if there are personal achievements and milestones that come with that, then that's great. But we certainly want to drive that culture, that behavior, that language, that this puts the team in the best position to win the game. And, that's the language we want to drive. And I'm certainly very chuffed for the fact that, these guys have put in these big performances early on in the tournament, which bodes well for, what's to come. And believe me, we're gonna come up against moments in this tournament where we're going to face some really big challenges, and the fact that we've gone through some real confident boosters, I think, is going to give us a great opportunity to get through those difficult times. The ability to lean on your partner in those difficult moments and have clear understanding of the language what we're talking about. But ultimately, it's going to come down to the partnership. How does it impact the game? And together, can we give ourselves the best chance to win the game?
Thanks, Heinz. We're going to take the last couple of questions with follow-ups from Zahir and then Tienis.
Zahir, are you there?
Tina's first, but I'll go. It's fine. Dirk, on a more positive note, part of
Thank you, Zahir, man. I appreciate that. Thank you. Carry on.
on maintain the one key to beating Australia is maintaining the pressure. They've gone down again. You guys have the opportunity to inflict a lot to put more pressure on them. Just what are you expecting? How hard are you expecting them to come at you, and how you confront that? That what Australia brings on Thursday.
Well, having had personal experiences against them when their backs against the wall, they're going to come out firing. Knowing their personality, it doesn't take them away from their style of play. They're going to come harder. So what is our response to that? Our response to that is really trying to stay in our bubble of process. And I know I'm sounding like a stuck record here, but that's certainly been our language. It's not necessarily fighting fire with fire. It was, what is the identity of the South African team? We're a resilient country. We stick together in tough times. So whatever is going to be thrown at us, we got to look each other in the eye and say, I'm going to do this for my mate. I'm going to do it for the guy on the other side, and understand the how. Often what gives us that sort of muddled feeling is not understanding the how of what's in front of us. So that's been a consistent sort of conversation for us, as we understand the what needs to be done, but now the conversation needs to lead to what's the how, particularly in the middle. So when we're under pressure, what is our next move? And we've got to be very intentional about that. And ultimately, if we think about where we've gone wrong in past, including myself, is when we're under pressure, we haven't made good decisions. So can we be in a better position to make sound decisions under pressure? That's ultimately going to give us the best chance, not only to beat Australia in a World Cup match, but any team that we come up against.
Thanks, Zahir. We're going to go Tienis, then wrap up with Heinz.
Thanks, Lucy. JP's been speaking a lot about the process and you guys sticking in your bubble. But I was just wondering if I could maybe get a comment from you about the specific threats of a Stark, Hazelwood, Cummins, that sort of base bowling trio.
Yeah, great point. So that's certainly been a discussion already. So again, conditions are going to dictate that. So it's not just the out and out, this is going to be the threat. I think first and foremost, what are the conditions, right? So conditions are in some ways separate from the opposition. So it's really just assessing that. Now, what are they giving? Is the ball going to be swinging? How does that influence the options that we have? What's the bounce and carry like? Is there some lateral movement? These are the things that we're going to have to assess early, and ultimately that is going to influence the options we take. And that, as I said, is the language that we're speaking. But in that space is not a survival mode. It's still having a clear understanding of how do I assert pressure with all the information that is in front of me. And if we can make those decisions quicker and sharper, and not individually but together, and that's where the communication comes in together as a partnership, I think we give ourselves the best chance. So if each one of them would pose different threats, but it's the communication, it's the understanding of our options, and ultimately we're going to judge ourselves on our execution, which we're going to have to wait and see for after the game.
Thanks. And then lastly, Heinz.
Thanks, Lucy. JP, just in terms of Mark, he obviously has a very important role to play in that batting lineup as a number 7. But I'm just wondering, what type of conversations are you having with him, particularly with your reference to you might actually get some keep on being the solid hitter that he has been, you know, for the past few weeks? Or have you actually sort of like made a bit of a contingency that he might have to come into a situation at some stage like he had in Bloemfontein, where he always had to consolidate with like 20 overs left still and stuff? Or is that the type of conversation you don't try to put on the forefront because you actually want to encourage the top 6 to take most of the responsibility?
Yeah, in a perfect world, you'd want the top 6 to take most of the responsibility, but you know, we could find ourselves in a situation where Marco comes in with quite a few overs still left in the game where he needs to make an impact. So he understands that. We've had conversations around that, and he hasn't, you know, he's still young in his career, so he hasn't had many opportunities with that to truly understand what that looks like for him. So I think in many ways it's still an opportunity for him to explore and discover certain things about his game. But that's the beauty. So what we don't want to do as a coaching staff is to try and overcoach those moments. We have to allow the freedom and opportunity for him to explore that and discover himself in those moments. The thing that we really want to encourage, though, is that we don't want him to shrink. We don't want him to go into his box in just that survival mode. And we've certainly, in past times, as a South African team and a South African batting lineup, we found ourselves there. We want him to express himself, back his options, have clear understanding according to the conditions. What are my options here? How am I going to score as opposed to how am I going to survive? So language is important, and I keep reiterating that. But he is a naturally gifted flair player, so you don't want to take that away. It's just you want to hone in a clear understanding of how do I score, not about how do I survive. And I'm excited to see him in those moments, because that's really gonna show the true class and ability of a player with his quality, which I'm pretty excited by.